And persons of quality, welcome. Thank you for showing up. As Dan Brooks told you, this is creative nonfiction. That is, this is what really happened as best I can remember it and tell it to you. Okay? And it's called Sasquatch with Golden Gloves, a romance in 11th grade. Whoomp! As I stood in the movie theater concession stand line one spring evening in 10th grade, an iron shoulder knocked me over, all-star wrestling style. Now, fending off unprovoked attacks is part of growing up male. In my cinematic imagination, I always karate'd the other guy to his knees, and before dealing the death chop, I said something witty in a Sean Connery accent. In my disturbingly unchoreographed real life, however, I lost to anyone with serious training in the brutal arts. That is, anyone with siblings. As an only child, therefore, I developed my own strategy. When challenged, I looked as detached and British as I could, and I talked, thereby diffusing the tension and stalling until an authority figure intervened. On that day in the theater lobby, I put on my best, the name is Bond, James Bond, look and faced my assailant. There stood Maria Langston. Maria. 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 I'd been knocked over by a girl named Maria. She was a short, dark-eyed brunette with hair cut like Liza Minnelli's in Cabaret. Now, I'd been knocked over in public by a girl before. In 3rd grade, one day on the playground, Barbara Benderson announced that she didn't believe in dinosaurs because the Bible didn't include them. I insisted that my friends, Triceratops and Tyrannosaurus, really existed. Barbara retorted with a defense as effective as the sling David used to fell Goliath. Argumentum ad kick in the groin. But a decade later, in the movie theater lobby, Maria wasn't defending Genesis or debilitating my groin. She smiled at me across the theater lobby and sprinted into the auditorium. I had 3 thoughts. Love, love, and love. I strutted into the movie theater where I saw Maria sitting next to a guy named Alex who had his arm around her. Rembrandt, Titian. I sat in high culture boot camp, learning how to hobnob with the Swiss billionaires, French heroin traffickers, and Soviet double agents I'd meet in my next mission. Lautrec, Mondrian. Actually, I sat in my 11th grade humanities class early in the fall quarter. I enjoyed humanities, a course I'd chosen as an elective in lieu of advanced algebra. I assumed humanities would transform me, a hick from small-town Minnesota, into my true self, an international playboy licensed to kill. Today, the instructor, Mr. LePlume, was teaching art appreciation. Da Vinci, Monet. Mr. LePlume had a briefcase full of 8x12 prints of famous paintings. He held them up one at a time, and we called out the artist's name, a practice similar to flashcards in 3rd grade math drills. We didn't discuss artistic movements or concepts, mind you. We simply looked and yelled. Van Gogh, Matisse. I admired Mr. LaPlume, or LaPlue, as students called him behind his back. Now, all young males reach a stage at which they ask themselves, is Dad all there is to being a man? The answer cannot be yes, so adolescent boys look to others for help with their male identity. I idolized LaPlue. He carried himself with a big city air of sophistication, even though the metropolis he came from was Duluth. Also, he wore turtleneck sweaters, just like my childhood hero, Agent Ilya Kuryakin, on the Man from U.N.C.L.E. TV show. LaPlue was cool. Vermeer, Dolly. Now, when Maria Langston collided with me the previous spring, I assumed she must be on the verge of breaking up with Alex. Summer came, but every time I checked for news of Maria giving Alex his walking papers, I discovered nothing. When the new school year started in the fall, however, Maria ended up with a locker only 2 away from mine, a sure sign she was meant to be my bond babe. By timing things right, I ran into her accidentally every day. Alas, those moments of scheduled spontaneity never developed beyond, "Hi, how are you? Degas, Pollock." Finally, LaPlue put the prints away and announced, "Question time, kiddies." When addressing his class as a group, he called us kiddies. The man grinned. One of his front teeth was capped in silver. It glinted in the morning sunlight. "Chesley." LaPlue always called male students by their last names. "Name the 5 boroughs of New York City." Uh-oh. Cool people know this, right? Now, the day before, LaPlue had named the boroughs and told us that New York is the only place in the U.S. worth living. Brooklyn, Bronx, Queens, Staten Island, and LaPlue turned to Stephanie Bjornson. "Bjornson, you mad woman!" When LaPlue addressed female students, he attached "you mad woman" to their names. Stephanie Bjornson giggled. Girls did that when LaPlue accused them of mental instability. Manhattan?" How could I forget Manhattan, the coolest of all the boroughs? LaPlue nodded. "That's it, mad woman." That's it, I thought. The next morning, I began my stakeout. I stood at my locker and arranged, messed up, and rearranged my textbooks to kill time. Ah, Maria. I imagined our future together. Maria and I would be the most envied couple at prom, win full scholarships to some faux university out east, probably Colgate, wed, move to Manhattan, and live among our peers, the cultured rich. Clack, 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 came the sound of Maria's clogs as she walked down the hall. Clack, 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 stop. I slammed my locker door shut and shouted, "Good morning, Langston, you mad woman!" Maria tilted back her head and blasted out what sounded like the second half of Woody Woodpecker's laugh. Ah! You remember Woody Woodpecker would laugh, ha 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 ha? Okay, well that's what she sounded like, the second half. After that, she scampered down the hall without even opening her locker. I wondered how the cultured rich would take to Maria's laughing like a cartoon woodpecker. At this point, I should state that no adolescent identity construction takes place in a vacuum. My father, God bless him, was having a midlife crisis, so he bought something. Not a Ferrari, which would have caused instant father-son bonding, but a Citizens Band radio. 2, actually. One for the house and one for his car, so he could listen to police dispatches and cross-country truckers. I won't violate the 5th commandment by dishonoring him, but I will say that my father, the man who made me spend Saturday afternoons practicing grammar when I was in 5th grade, my father now sauntered around the house saying things like, 10-4, good buddy, and looks like we got us a convoy. Feel free to speculate about how my father's midlife crisis energized the Bond fantasies. Well, Maria's okay, but she has that boyfriend, Alex. I feigned ignorance. Oh yeah? I sat next to Scott Snirkelson in Principles of Design, an elective I'd pounced upon to replace 11th grade physical education. Scott was a hyperactive fringe friend, someone I liked but didn't socialize with, and thus I could trust him. In Brainerd High School, a full friend would use your secrets for blackmail, but a fringe friend wouldn't get anything out of backstabbing you. Scott and I like to discuss what made specific girls undateable. We disqualified Stephanie Bjornson because she collected Hummel figurines. Doreen Knox because she hummed country western tunes. And anyone else who violated that week's dictates of coolness. Now, I'd never heard Maria Langston hum country western, and her life seemed Hummel-free, but a guy must get another male's approval before he asks a girl out. So I dropped Maria's name as casually as I could. Scott asked, "So, what do you know about Alex?" I shrugged. I'd researched Maria, of course. She had a younger stepbrother. Her stepfather delivered mail. I'd even driven past her house to make sure the yard had no pink plastic flamingos. That drive-by counted as reconnaissance, not stalking. But I hadn't run a background check on her boyfriend, Alex. Scott leaned forward, lowered his voice as if passing on the launch code to the Soviet intercontinental ballistic missile system, and said, "Alex is a light heavyweight in Golden Gloves boxing." Crime and Punishment, Dostoevsky. War and Peace, Tolstoy. In humanities class, we were grappling with literature. Pride and Prejudice, Austen. We didn't read these works, of course. LePlue just had us connect authors and names. As we shouted things out that day, however, I thought about Maria's boyfriend, the Golden Gloves boxer, a man trained to knock other men senseless. I handled this threat to my machismo in the most logical manner possible. I fantasized. In the movie of my life, I cast Alex as a Bond supervillain along the lines of Oddjob. I even gave him a supervillain name, Sasquatch. Lady Chatterley's lover, Lawrence. My fantasy shifted into high. Outside the Grand Casino in Monaco, Sasquatch confronted me. "You stole my girl," he said, balling up his fists. I smiled. "Tell me, Sasquatch, who wrote Lady Chatterley's lover?" "Why, D.H. Lawrence, of course." On the second syllable of Lawrence, I shot him with a pistol that looked like a fountain pen. I ran through this fantasy repeatedly. Each time I sounded more like Sean Connery. Don Quixote, Cervantes. Suddenly, I knew how to win Maria away from Sasquatch. I'd actually read one of the great books and use it as a conversation starter. How could Maria ignore a guy full of learning and depth and stuff? Now, I want to interject here that in my Bond fantasies, I wore a three-piece suit. In my father's midlife crisis, he joined a CB radio club and sported their uniform, a light blue flannel vest with Northern Lights Citizens Band Radio Club on the back in day-glow orange. It may just be coincidence, but the lad who fantasized in a suit never thought to ask the man who wore that vest for advice about women. Well, I visited the library to find a great book, but frowned in front of the card catalog. What would impress Maria? A love story, probably, but which titles represented romance? Not Crime and Punishment, surely, or War and Peace. Certainly not any dreck named Pride and Prejudice. Lady Chatterley's Lover sounded promising, but the card catalog didn't include it. I walked up and down the rows of books until seized by the muse of surface knowledge. I didn't have to read an entire work. I could just find appropriate sayings. I embraced Bartlett's quotations, a must-have for sophisticated flirtation, and came up with something from Pascal. The heart has reasons that reason knows not. Certainly that would open the heart of a girl who knocked a guy over in a theater lobby. With bold strokes of a black flare, I wrote Pascal's insight on a 4x6 card and taped it at Maria's eye level inside my locker door. The next morning, when Maria came to her locker, I casually opened mine and waited for Pascal to inflame her. She read the card cautiously out of the corner of her eye as I watched her out of the corner of mine. Here we go, I thought. Baby, I'm yours. When she finished Pascal, Maria blipped me a fraction of a smile. It wasn't a half smile, or a quarter, or even an eighth. She gave me about 1/16 of a smile, then walked away. The next day I taped up a different saying, for which I received another fractional smile, perhaps an eighth, but no conversation. This ritual continued for 2 weeks, but the smiles never grew beyond a cautious eighth. I considered giving up when I found a particularly pithy comment from Russian writer Maxim Gorky. Everybody, my friend, everybody lives for something better to come. Indeed, Maria's response transcended my expectations. She glanced at my open locker door, pointed to the quotation, and said, "Maxim Gorky, I like that name. Maximum Gork." Maria faked a karate chop to my throat, made a gorking noise, oop, and broke into her Woody Woodpecker laugh. Ah! Then she walked away. Mozart, Beethoven. In humanities, we were focusing on music. LePlue had a big black vinyl record, K-Tel's 50 Great Classical Music Hits, revolving on the turntable. He held the playing arm in his hand, dropped it at the beginning of one of the 50 bands, and lifted it again the moment we called out the composer's name. Bach, Handel. That upcoming weekend, the local community college was putting on MAME, a musical about a woman who does what she wants, despite society's opinions. I consider musicals pathetic fluff, and have hated them since my 9th birthday party. Back then, I begged my parents to take my friends and me to a movie to celebrate. I had in mind an espionage adventure like Goldfinger or Dr. No, but my parents opted for The Sound of Music. I pleaded for a guy movie, anything with gore and speed. But my parents dragged Leon, Matt, Ted, and me to the overly precious story of the Trapped Family Singers, and I got labeled the boy who likes dorky movies. In 11th grade, however, the performance of a musical offered the perfect opportunity for a first date. If Maria hated this form of entertainment, well, nothing would bring two people together more quickly than ridiculing a musical. But Maria's attachment to the Golden Gloves boxer KO'd this opportunity. Tchaikovsky, Chopin. Now, being a member of the Northern Lights Citizens Band Radio Club, my father needed a handle, a nickname to identify himself with when on the radio. Since broadcasting your real name isn't half so fun as assuming an identity on the airwaves. My father, the man with a master's degree from Northwestern, proclaimed himself the Pinto Kid. No comment. Guess what I heard? Asked Scott Snurkelson. We sat together once again in Principles of Design. I'd come to think of him as my sidekick in Sasquatch with Golden Gloves, the first film in a series featuring master spy Brent Chesley. Scott grinned. Maria just broke up with Alex. Huzzah! Exactly the sort of info a sidekick should discover. Now I could ask Maria out without breaking the unspoken but universally understood code of male conduct, which stated that one guy must leave another guy's girl alone or else get executed. After school that day, I reserved tickets for the Sunday matinee and planned my phone call to Maria. Previous attempts to ask women out had gone poorly. So to guide me in this scenario, I wrote a script of what I would say and how she would respond. I put the script by the phone, rehearsed several times, and dialed. I didn't have to look up her number. I'd memorized that the day after she knocked me over in the movie theater lobby. Hello? Maria's voice. Hi, Maria. This is Brent Chesley. Brent? Oh, hi. Now, in the script I'd written, Maria showed more enthusiasm when she heard my name. Oh, well. Maria, would you like to see Mame on Sunday afternoon? Mame? Good. In my script, she didn't recognize the title. It's a musical playing at the community college. This was the key moment. In the script, I'd written two possible dialogues. In one, Maria agreed to accompany me on the spot. Well, in the other, she said she hated musicals, to which I replied that I did too, and wouldn't she like to go make fun of one? Oh, said Maria. I can't. My script had no dialogue to cover a rejection. Maria went on. I have to babysit my stepbrother this Sunday. Oh, well, okay, see you around. Yeah, bye. Click. Drat. Failing to get a date is part of growing up male, but losing out because of babysitting? Absurd. Plus, I'd already reserved tickets. What to do? Now, some guys would have in mind a second girl to ask, an understudy, but I'd never formed a plan B. Asking a male friend to a musical had gay overtones, and nothing violated the unspoken but universally understood code of male conduct more than a disruption of one of its two core principles: I'm not a homo. The other principle, of course, is I'm not a woman. In my high school, all definitions of acceptable masculinity, from loving Ferraris to hating Hummel figurines, grew out of those two primary negations. We couldn't necessarily tell what we were, but we knew damn well what we weren't, okay? After much frowning and brow furrowing, I decided I could safely ask my sidekick, Scott, if he wanted to see Mame. He knew about my pursuit of Maria, so he wouldn't misinterpret my invitation. Of course, by inviting Scott, I raised him from fringe friend to full friend, but he had nothing to gain by betraying me. Come Sunday, Scott and I attended Mame. I got bored early on and pondered whether an assassin could get a better shot at the lead singer from the left or the right side of the lighting catwalk above us. I'd settled on the left side and begun diagramming the shooter's escape route when intermission came. Out in the lobby, Scott and I chatted about the shallowness of musicals when suddenly a voice said, "Well, hi, fancy meeting you here." Ah! I turned to see Maria and her best buddy, Jody, a blonde math genius who always seemed to be just coming out of a coma. But by the way, Jody was undateable not because her prowess with numbers threatened guys, but because her father was the high school principal. Maria asked, "You guys enjoying the show?" "Oh, it's great," Scott lied. I wanted to try a Sean Connery accent and congratulate Maria on bilocating to attend the musical and babysit at the same time, but I decided against it. I spent the second half of the musical fabricating excuses for Maria's behavior. Maybe she actually had to babysit her stepbrother, but got out of it at the last moment, and Jody, tickets in hand, showed up at her front door before Maria could call me. Perhaps Jody had hypnotized Maria or trained a Maria look-alike to impersonate her. Math types probably did that sort of thing. I wanted to bump into Maria and Jody after the show and have the four of us go out for coffee, an idea that Scott endorsed when I suggested it. But when the lights came up after the curtain call, we couldn't locate the pair. Several days later, during open study hall, I walked laps around the inside of the school. Maria's hair reminds me of Liza Minnelli, I told myself. But so does her nose. I wouldn't like to hear that Woody Woodpecker laugh the rest of my life anyway. Besides, that laugh came from a mouth like Carol Burnett's. Who'd want to kiss Carol Burnett? Such are the thoughts of a spurned Sean Connery wannabe. After much pouting, I walked down an annex that contained the art department. It was a dead end. When I turned around, I saw, standing in my path, Sasquatch. He'd skipped class, not to allow me to shoot him outside the Grand Casino in Monaco, as I'd fantasized repeatedly, but to clobber me outside the art department. There I stood, the challenger, facing a Golden Gloves man, a heavyweight weighing up to 175 pounds, defending his title as Maria Langston's boyfriend. Boxers size each other up at a glance, so he must have classified me at once by mass as a light welterweight and by training a negative number. No doubt he knew what Muhammad Ali had taught Sonny Liston and Floyd Patterson. It's easier to knock a man out with 3 or 4 medium punches delivered from different angles in rapid succession than with one sledgehammer blow. Looking at me, though, Sasquatch knew that one light punch would send me into dementia pugilistica. I, on the other hand, knew D.H. Lawrence wrote Lady Chatterley's Lover. Sasquatch stood still, his hands relaxed. He said, "Hi." "Hi," I replied, thinking, "Look cool. The name is Bond, James Bond." Alex said, "Heard you asked Maria out." "Well, I heard she broke up with you," I replied, a bit too quickly. "Slow down. Don't challenge him. Act British." "Yeah," Sasquatch replied. "She did." Now, if Maria really had ended their relationship, I hadn't violated the unspoken but universally understood code of male conduct. at least not technically. But I decided not to quibble with a boxer. Now, if this were fiction, right now, around the corner would have come LePlue to save me, the humanities to the rescue. Or, better yet, my father, the Pinto Kid in his CB vest. In reality, no one appeared. But it occurred to me that the principal's office was around the corner and 10 yards down the hall. If I yelled loudly enough, the principal would come to investigate. But then, if I became known as that guy who screamed for Jody's dad to save him, I'd label myself undateable for life. British, act British. Sasquatch asked, "You think Maria would go out with you?" In my mind, Sean Connery said bold things, defiant things. You can torture me and I won't break things. In the art annex, however, Brent Chesley said, "Well, obviously not." "Thanks," said Alex. He walked away. When I told Scott Snirkelson about this incident, I didn't claim that my cool act had saved me from a beating, but I decided to let him believe that if he wanted to. Instead, Scott laughed. "Oh, Alex wouldn't hit you. He's in Golden Gloves. They don't hit people who don't box." Well, I'd been memorizing artists, authors, and musicians. Alex had been living a Hemingway-like code that told him hitting humanities types was unmanly. The realization shamed me so much, I decided to sign up for a physical education class in the spring. Weight training, no less. But at the last minute, I took drawing instead. That spring in drawing class, Scott Snirkelson let slip that he and Maria were going to prom together. In the war of all against all that is high school social life, Scott was a double agent. He had used me to see whether Alex would follow the Golden Gloves code before Scott made his move for Maria. For a moment, I envisioned a devastating revenge. I could start a rumor that Scott collected Hummel figurines. But instead I laughed. He made a better secret agent than I did, I conceded. Now, let me close by summarizing the lives of the people involved. Maria married, not Scott, but another one of my full friends. In fact, I was a groomsman at their ceremony. Scott became a television reporter. Although my father yearned to be the Pinto Kid, his fellow CBers knew that he worked at the community college and insisted on calling him the professor. That was no fun, so after a time, he quietly put his CB equipment in the attic. Sasquatch surprised us all. Instead of becoming a professional boxer, he learned about computers. In fact, eventually he founded his own company, which specializes in getting programs created for American businesses to interact with business programs in other languages. He's been quoted in the Wall Street Journal and U.S. News and World Report. I guess he didn't have to know who wrote Lady Chatterley's Lover. And I? Well, James Bond's employer, MI6, wouldn't have me, nor would Hollywood. So I pursued British literature in graduate school, where I learned more than just the titles of books, and where I met a young woman named Laurie. One of the first things that she said to me was,
"I hate musicals."
I knew that woman was my Bond babe. Thank you. If anyone has questions of any sort, I would gladly answer them as long as they don't endanger national security or anything like that. Well, if not, thank you again.